27 specifically, and if we have time to address the Daniel 7 and Daniel 8, we can do that. Just for a reference, I mentioned before, I'll mention again, there's a friend who has a YouTube site called Mountain Air 7. The word mountain, and then the word air, no space, A-I-R-E, and then the number 7. That's YouTube. So last week, before I came here, this is down in California, and we shot half a dozen videos where I was talking about these very verses. So they're in like little half-hour sections, I believe. There may be 6, 7, 8 of them, whatever it is. He was going to put them up presently, but he has slow internet access and takes like all night and day to put up a video for whatever reason, so I don't know if he has them up yet. But just so you know, if you go there, hopefully soon, the method of my interpretation of these verses has nothing to do with doctrine, just so you know. All I'm doing is looking at the words. And I'm looking at the words the same way that I just showed you the word Seuss. In other words, here's the spelling of the word, here's the dictionary definition, but then there's a way to see it as a picture. And virtually every translation I've ever seen has gone with the dictionary definition. The problem with that is that sometimes words have many different meanings. And if anybody wants to see what I mean by that, look at the word in the dictionary spelled Shin, Ayin, Resh. In the modern Hebrew, it will be Shin, Ayin, Resh. And just look at how many different entries there is for that word, and then try to wrap your mind around all those various definitions to find the essence of what that word is really talking about. That's just a little exercise you can do to put yourself into the frame of mind, which is the basis of this whole way of studying that I'm trying to show you. For what it's worth, that word Shinai and Resh is translated meaning horrible or terrible, dark, stormy, a goat, a gateway or entrance, and the concept of appraising the value of something. It's pronounced Sair, which has to do with Esau. The picture of a dark, terrible, stormy goat is adjectives that they pull off of if you saw a long-haired, charcoal gray goat standing there in the rain, so his wool is all shaggy and looking menacing. That picture image you get of that goat ends up being the various definitions of that word Sair. The other way that my mind goes with that particular word, why does it mean assess and appraise the value of something, which is very similar to the word spelled Ayin Resh Kaf that we defined before, and very similar to the word Bet Yod Nun, and very similar to the word Mem Nun or Mem Nun Hey, but they all mean count and number and appraise and assess and determine the value. But it also means gateway and entrance. So the stock market, for example, is the gateway or the entrance to the country, like New York City, where commodities are assessed and valued for the terms of that day in the international economy. And horrible is a bad thing, but it's also direly serious. So that picture of the stock exchange is one way to read the word Sair, even though it has nothing to do with a goat, nothing to do with a storm, nothing to do with Esau. But I'm just trying to show you how you can look at a word, look at the definition, try to think of it in the context of the culture back then, and appropriate it, and why in the world would I say it's like the stock exchange? But they would go to the city gates and sit there, and the men, the wise men of the city would sit in the gate, and if anybody came in, it's kind of like checking passports. You could say it's like the airport terminal where people are immigrating, and they'd see whether the guy was a criminal, see if the guy had any weapons on him, see if the guy was bringing in produce that had bugs or disease, or see whether he was going to ruin the local economy by bringing in goods that would upset the balance of trade, which is why they have tariffs. That whole concept is what Sair is about. But the only way for you to know that is to open the dictionary. You could look at Strong's, you could look at other dictionaries, and you could go to the various places in the scripture where that word is used and see it in context, see it in use, and then you could look at these two letters, Shin Ayin. That's actually the word for Yeshua or Yahusha. This is the Shah, Shin Ayin. It's the same word that's used in Hosea and Isaiah. It's the same two letters, which means to save or redeem or deliver. If you put those two letters together, so it's Shasha, it's actually the word for delight. And then Resh is the exalted man. So you could say redeem the exalted man, or Ayin Resh is the word for to be vigilant and watchful, and it's the word for looking out for your enemy. Anyway, what I'm saying is that there's numerous different ways to read any word, and that's not the intention at this moment to go into that, but I'm trying to show you that that's what we're about to do with Daniel, is to look at the words that he used in different ways than what you might normally expect by your typical translation. So, the other day we went through this with someone else later at night. It'll be a little bit of a review of the same thing, and I mentioned half the verse the other day and we didn't get through the whole thing, so I'll see if I can get through it here. I don't want to go too fast and lose you or confuse you, but I just want to show you why there's different translations, and then let you decide whether you should completely trust the translation that you have. So, the context of Daniel 9:27 where's those other here? The context of this is set up in Daniel 9:24, which we talked about the other day. I'm not going to go over the whole thing in detail, but the beginning of the verse, the chapter of Daniel 9, is Daniel, who was the chief Chaldean. The word Chaldean is also translated as astrologer or magi, like the word magician, or the wisest of the guys that knew secret mysteries. And Daniel was the chief. So I believe, as I mentioned before, in Daniel 12, that Daniel actually was commissioned by the archangel Gabriel to hide the words and seal the book, that I think he did it by changing the orthography from the Paleo into the modern, what some people call Chaldean flame letters. Now, if you look on the internet, Chaldean flame letters also take a different form, and I haven't chased that thing down because it just doesn't matter. So whether somebody says, oh, those aren't really flame letters, but the way you use a calligraphy pen and put this little flourish on the tip of each one is like this little flame, and from what I understand, that's this esoteric way of writing to embed the notion that these things are alive, that they're like these flames, because there's a verse where it says Yahweh wrote with flaming letters when he wrote with his finger on the table of stone with the Ten Commandments. That itself can be read with a different way of interpretation, but just so you know, there's this context where the consensus is within the Jewish culture is that Yahweh wrote with his finger with modern Hebrew letters on the tables of stone, not the Paleo. But being that we've never opened up the Ark of the Covenant to see what's in there, there's no way to know that. The oldest artifacts go back to about 1000 BC or maybe even 1200, and they're all in Paleo, some form. Somebody asked me, just to clear up for the record, there is no artifact with this collection of letters found. what I did is I looked at all the various collection of paleo artifacts I could find on the internet or encyclopedias, and picked and chose from different eras the letter shapes. So these are all authentic letter shapes, but they're not necessarily from any one artifact of any one era from any one scribe. So I picked and chose the letter shapes which most clearly spoke by themselves just by looking at the simplicity, which is to say the elegant shape of any letter, which is elegant meaning unadorned, unfrilled. In other words, just a streamlined, simple orthography, shape of the graphic lettering style. So with its simplest form, how does each letter speak of itself, what it means? And I assembled as a collection the 22 letters. So this is not the lettering style that Yahweh wrote with his finger. Nobody knows what that is. Nobody has found the scroll that Moshe wrote, and haven't even found anything that David wrote. The oldest artifacts are either carved in stone or in pottery or on some scroll from the Dead Sea, which doesn't even go back that far. But there is a Leviticus scroll written in Paleo using these letter shapes, found in Qumran from the Dead Sea. And there is other scrolls written in modern Hebrew letters, but yet they retained the Paleo when it came to using Yod, He, Vav, He, as if that name written in Paleo was too sacred to mess with by changing it, which just kind of validates the notion that the Paleo was the official language and that was modified. And again, who would have had the audacity or the authority, being commissioned from on high, to do it and still make these letters a sacred regard? Daniel. So I'm not knocking the modern. The modern is what we have, and if Daniel was told to hide the words and seal the book until the time of the end, or until the time of waking up, because Kufzadi means to wake up, or Yod Kufzadi does anyway, and Yod is this functional, almost like a vowel, it's a consonant, but it's a functional letter prefix, which means to put something into, grab a hold and make that happen. Or you could mean he will, but that's kind of what it means. Anyway, the point is, if Daniel was commissioned to do it, it's not bad. I'm not knocking the modern. So these letter shapes are easy on the mind, as far as I can tell. And this is a right brain, left brain thing. Logic and image, picture, hieroglyph, logogram. Gram is anything written. So grammar or grammaton in Greek. An epistle, a book, anything written is gramma. Logo is some image which speaks of a greater thing. So like you see that picture of the Nike swish, like this, and you know that Nike in Greek means victory, but the swish represents the entire company and its ideologies. That's a logogram, something that's written that represents a whole bigger construct. So each one of the Paleo letters is a logogram. Now, if we look at 927, it's because Daniel, being the chief Chaldean, had access to the library, the archives, the place where all the books from all the kingdoms conquered were kept. And he goes and he's rooting around in there and he finds these scrolls written by Jeremiah where it said it would be 70 years, that they would be in captivity. So then he, in chapter 9, prays to Yahweh and says, hey, we have done wickedly. Yahweh, you kept the covenant, and according to the terms of the covenant, we've been in captivity for 70 years. Can we please come home? Can we come back? And Yahweh sent Gabriel back to say, sure, you can come back. And then Cyrus brought them back to Jerusalem later, but I'm just setting up the context. So chapter 9 is Daniel praying, and in verse 24, the angel Gabriel being sent to him says, let me tell you what's going on here. Let me give you understanding because your prayer's been heard. 7 things have to happen in order to fulfill Yahweh's intention for your people. And that's where it says 70 sevens. But the word 70, as I said the other day, also the word 7, Shin Bet Ayin, or if you, again, you can stick yods and vavs between here to look up a word. So if you write Shavua, it still means 7. And then if you multiply it by adding a yod mem, which is the plural, they say it means 70. But just like with Elohim, adding the yod mem suffix means the greatest, the highest, the best, the most, the extreme. So it still means seven of a sort. And the word seven literally means to swear a vow, to take an oath, and the imprecations of the curse, the details of the curse, what you subject yourself to if you break the vow. So when Abraham split the animals in half, and then the pillar of fire image, billowing smoke, he said it was like a furnace and a torch, this image that he saw in his kind of like a hallucination went through the split animals. It was saying, you break this vow, you break this covenant, and you'll be cut in half. So that was a traditional thing that people did. So either party break that covenant, and they get that curse. So Yahweh says 7 things have to happen. One was, to go over it quickly, one was to fence off rebellion. So there's a picture of the big white fence. The next thing, like the barbecue grill, you break this Torah and you incur the oath, or you incur the curse by breaking the oath, which means you sign up for a certain amount of time, like getting a subscription. That's literally what those words mean if you look at them in Hebrew. And as we said, according to Leviticus 26 and Ezekiel chapter 4, that total was 2,730 years, which is the length of the curse, which is another thing. You break this law, and you get a curse for 2,730 years if you don't come back to it, and so that was that whole study. The next thing he said is wash away iniquity. So this has to do with introspection of your own heart. And as we said, this lines up with the letters Het, Tet, Yod, and this with Kaf, Lamed, and this one with Mem, Nun. And then he said the purpose of the 77s was to bring in or conduct everlasting righteousness. But the word everlasting, olam, can also be read as worldwide or universal or mankind. So somehow lining up with the menorah is, just like we said about go back and make the Kadosh Shem of Yahweh comprehensible in the eyes of the nations. He said, Yeshua said, we are the light of the world. So we are supposed to let our light shine, be in the branches with the lit menorah, not a dead menorah, and there happened to be 22 cups, like there on that menorah with the lightning bolt sort of things. So if there's 22 and there's 7 branches, all built out of one menorah. 22 cups on 7 branches on one menorah. And he said this is supposed to conduct or cause to import worldwide righteousness. And what does that mean? Righteousness, by definition, is doing the instructions. Sin is breaking his instructions. That's the simple definition. I mean, you can label things and put together, compile a list of what is a sin or what righteousness, what righteous things might be, but essentially the scripture defines it. Your Torah, to keep it is righteousness and to break it is sin. So if you break it, we're up for the 27, 30-year curse if we don't come back and start doing righteousness. So when he says, and this, remember, this is Daniel 9:24, we're talking about this verse here. The next thing is confirm vision. Well, there's the letter ayin, the table of showbread, and all the things having to do with balancing of scales, what goes around comes around. But the fact that it lines up with the ayin, it's Yahweh's vision, where he says, I will be your Elohim and you will be my people. So we do this. This one was to fence off rebellion. And this was to pay for the sins, and this was to clean your heart of iniquity, and this is to bring in righteousness, or put righteousness on display so people can tell the difference of what's going on. And this was then fulfill Yahweh's vision. And then the next one was to fulfill prophecy. So it happens to be the ayin and the pei, and this lining up with the altar of incense. And then the last word lining up with the Ark of the Covenant, which is the letter Zadi, he said to anoint the most holy, or to anoint the word is Mashach, Kadosh Kodashim. So Mashach is where you get the word Mashiach, which is Messiah, Mem Shin Het. But Mem Shin is to touch or feel. And so there's something, and the word shin het is communication. So this might be tangible communication. Well, Yeshua himself was the Word made flesh, the Word in human form that we could grab a hold of, which they did grab a hold of, rip him apart and throw him in a tomb. He was the communication made flesh. So there's something about Meshach Kadosh Kodashim is make tangible reality the communication of the Kadosh Kodashim. Well, what's Kadosh? Kadosh, as we said, is defined by Yahweh's intention, plan, vision, spirit, ruach, mind. Everything he's about is Kadosh, and the Kodashim could be like the ultimate, most purest form, the most set apart, or the Kodashim is also what he calls his people. So for his people to be actually doing and being, functioning in the Kadosh, tangibly, visibly, in reality, is another way of interpreting Meshach Kadosh Kodashim. So that actually fulfills the vision that he prophesied numerous times, as we said the other day, all through Isaiah and Jeremiah and Ezekiel and Deuteronomy 30, and where he says, I'm going to be your Elohim and you're going to be my people. I see that happening. Therefore, the world cannot end until it happens, because what he said has to happen before it gets to the end, or it's not the end yet. Therefore, we read these things in the scripture, this is not the end of the world. These things haven't happened where this has happened, but as I said, if you're going through a checklist, okay, the fact that we're here at the Moed, the fact that we keep his Shabbat, the fact that we're learning about his name and his language is proof that we have done everything we can to fence rebellion, even though that stuff, it keeps trying to get out and influence us. Is the fact that we've already done the 2,730 years as of 2010, and that's from the year 721 BC, when the northern kingdom was taken into captivity by Assyria. So we could check that one off the list. The fact that we're sitting here trying to tend our heart, Yeshua said, I'll leave you the Ruach to lead you into truth, and that whole thing about what happened on the day of Pentecost, the day of Shavuot, where the Ruach was within us to lead us into truth, and you know, we're dealing with our heart, constantly trying to tend our heart, introspectively walking with him. That's the whole model of the, you might say, the New Testament era. This thing where we're doing what he said, well, what has it got to do with this pattern of the menorah? He said, I'm the vine, you're the branches. Stay plugged in him, bear fruit. The fruits of the Ruach are Galatians 5:22, right? Well, you could, break down those numbers and make something of it, like 5 by his grace, 22, we can sit there and do the 22 things. I mean, you can play around like that. That doesn't make it absolutely true, but it's just one of those connections. For us doing this regarding his stuff is fulfilling his vision as he said it would happen. So as we said about Jeremiah 31, Ephraim coming back to his senses like the prodigal son, slapping his thigh in anguish and going, what have I done? I've been so crazy. How could this have happened? And he says, Yahweh, bring me back and I will come back. And so he says, okay, gee, Ephraim is such a delightful child that as often as I think of him, my heart grows fonder and fonder. That's what Yahweh is saying to himself right now, according to the scripture. So he says, make road markers for yourself, big billboards. And so the whole concept is the Shields Project thing that I wrote about, and the whole concept of putting out these things and putting out the t-shirts that you're going to do, and all that is to say, hey, speak to each other and make like stepping stones along the way, or like curbs along the path of the Yashar Derek, the straight path, to help each other conduct the flow of our whole people, mind and action and thoughts and conversation along the path that you're supposed to be walking. That's what he says in Jeremiah 31. That's what we're doing so as to make tangible the Kadoshim being Kadosh, according to the illustration of Mashiach. That's what we're doing. So what I'm saying is we're doing this stuff. Well, that's all Daniel 9:24. Then he says, timing of 77s. So I'm not saying that 70-70 or 77s doesn't mean 77s. I'm saying there's another way to look at it as per this curse, this oath that we took, and what it means. There's different layers of ways to read, right? So then he says, here's the timing. Cyrus is going to let you guys come back, and then the Messiah is going to come, and then there's this 1 week floating. And then in verse 927, he starts talking about the 1 week floating. So this other stuff about history is in verse 25 and 26. So when he says, the way it's translated, he will make a strong covenant with many. Well, who's he talking about? If you look at the previous verse, he says, the ruler of the prince that will come will destroy the city and then he'll die. Is it talking about that guy who died? That was probably Titus or Vespasian, right? When they took over and smashed Jerusalem in 70 AD. So what's happened since 70 AD? It's almost been 2,000 years. This is 2017. Some people say, well, he's talking about the devil. Some people say, well, he's talking about the Antichrist, or he's talking about the beast, or he's talking about the Rome again. But it doesn't say who it is. So any of you who are looking at that verse, can you double check what I'm saying? Does it identify who the one is who's going to who's going to forge a strong covenant with many? What do you see?
I've seen their views, the people of the one that came, and the people that were on Titus was they took from different ethnic groups to make up their regiments, so that they didn't have conflict, and only the one was of Muslims.
Okay, so where he gets this idea that there's numerous different people groups of that guy that made up the Roman legions, he gets that out of the words that are in that verse. I'll show you where it comes from. But does anybody else see where it identifies who the one is that it's talking about in verse 27? I'm just saying, do you see where it identifies who it means? Any ideas? Yeah? Who? Who's he? What does it mean, wing of abominations? What does that phrase mean? Well, don't try to reiterate me. I'm just saying, if you hear the phrase, on the wing of abominations, what does that mean? Huh? On winds. Why didn't he say it'll come in like a wind? You're right, but what I'm saying is, so we have to look at what he said and say, did he use that word on purpose? Is it poetic? Is it metaphor? Or does it mean something else? I'm just trying to say, I'm trying to open up your mind to look at that word. Why did he use that word and phrase it that way? So what we're going to do is look at each word that he said as quick as I can to run through the whole verse. There's, 27, I think, just different words? Brenda, do you remember how many words is in that? Is she here? 20 words in this verse. Okay. I believe it starts with Veha, but I'll have to double check. But the word is Gabir. Gimel, Bet, Yod, Resh. Starts with the Veha. And then the next word is Brit. Just to make it easy, this word Brit, have you ever heard Brit? That's just covenant. Matthew Nolan did a talk where he said just because it says Brit doesn't mean it means the kind of Brit we think it is, because there was a certain covenant that had to have a proposal, an acceptance, a blood ratification, and a meal. And he says that certain kind of Brit is the Brit of the covenant with Moshe, but there's other times the word Brit is used that's not that kind of a Brit, but the fact is the word Brit has to do with terms of a covenant. And this Bet Resh Yod is similar to Bet Resh Aleph, which is the word for create. And the word Bet Resh as a word basically means pure or clean. It's the word bar as in bar mitzvah. So there's something, and then if you look at the word spelled Hey Bet Resh, see what I did is I stuck another prefix in front of that root word. And this then can be looked at, the Yod Tav as a suffix. I'm not going to do this with every word, but what I'm saying is that's how you break down the words to analyze what they're talking about. So there's something about this created relationship between a couple parties that's pure and clean. In other words, there's a law on the books in the States, which is British Admiralty law, basically, which basically says if you have a contract with somebody, there can't be any funny business. If you didn't go into it volitionally, knowing all the terms, it invalidates the contract. If somebody has a bunch of small print and they don't let you look at it, it's an invalid contract right off the top. If you think it says something and it doesn't, and you signed up for what you think it said, they could say, we could take it to court, you didn't look at the fine print, too bad for you. But if you had a mind that didn't line up with that contract, it actually invalidates the contract legally. You just have to have a lawyer to prosecute that. The point is, any contract, even in British law, has to be volitionally signed up by each of the parties, clear, distinct. That's basically what this is saying. So this has to do with some kind of a covenant created between who? Well, if you say he will forge a strong covenant with many, it's talking about this guy right here making a strong covenant, and then this word is la ravim. So here, this is the word rabbi, resh bet yod, and it means great, important, honored, many, or much. It's also Rab, Reshbet, is the word for arrows or archers. And then you picture like an old movie with a volley of arrows, thousands of arrows being shot to take out as many of the guys on the other side as the first shot that they can, kind of like a cannon barrage. It's the same word because it's like many, many arrows. So if I was just going to look at that word as, okay, that means many, or much, or important. And it's, like I said, it's the word rabbi. But wait a minute, there's another way to read this word. Larav. Larav, L-R-B, literally means to be composed of many parts or pieces. Well, if there's a whole congregation, or like the Roman legions, they were composed of many parts, but it's how you think of these things. The next words after this is, or I'm going to write this in English because it's in Hebrew, but I'm doing this on purpose to change your perspective. And of course, we're reading this direction, right? Because it's Hebrew right to left. He says 7, then he says 1, and then he says partitioning the 7. What does that mean? 7, 1, partitioning the 7. Remember when we drew a picture of the menorah, like up here on the flag? It was beaten out of one piece of gold with 7 branches. And the 7 branches were partitioned into 3 cups, 3 cups, 3 cups on each of the 6 branches, and 4 cups in the middle. My thinking is each cup, a cup is something which would hold something like oil, and maybe there was wicks, so of course everybody else is going to say, don't believe him, he's lying there. You've never seen a menorah with 22 wicks. But there was 22 cups. What do you put in a cup? You could put oil in a cup. They never make a menorah with 22 cups. They always make it where the cups are ornamentations on the branches. But think about this. That light was supposed to be forever, perpetually burning. If you had a branch with 1 wick and you had to trim the wick, you've got to snuff that branch out and put a new wick. If you had 3 cups, you could take out 1 wick, or if you didn't get to it in time and 1 burned out, you'd still have the light burning. So it seems to me reasonable to assume, right there I'm disqualifying myself, this is all subjective, but I think it's reasonable to assume that there might have been 22 cups of wicks lighting the menorah, which was 1 menorah with 7 branches, and the 7 were partitioned by the 22. That's a picture of the menorah then. That's a menorah pattern. And a moment ago in verse 24, we were just talking about the menorah pattern was keyed to the alphabet, which is 22, which was divided by the 7, which is echad. Same model. The 7 is the Mishkan pattern. The 22 is the 22 letters, which is the one Ruach, one voice, one heart that Yeshua said, I and my Father are one. Shema Israel, Yahweh Eloheinu, Yahweh Echad, one. So the singular voice divided by the 7 vow portrayed by the Mishkan pattern and partitioned, the 7 partitioned by the 22. It's a picture of the menorah, which is a picture of the Aleph Bet, which is a picture of the Mishkan pattern being the Echad Ruach of Yahweh. Okay, the next word it says is Yeshavit and Shin Bet Yod Tav. If you take out this vowel, you'll see it's Shin Bet Tav, which is the word Shabbat, which means to sit and dwell. Okay, sit and dwell. But if you look in the dictionary, you'll see the word Yeshavit also. What happens? Think of the action, like the moth. Is it a picture of a moth or is it the fluttering of the moth? When you sit and dwell, you're confused and somebody explains it and you sit and you go, oh, okay. You settle down relaxed because it's been explained. So this word literally means explain. The next word is Zavach, Zion Bet Het, which is the word for slaughter or sacrifice. Now, if I just mention the word slaughter, you could think of a barbecue. You can think of a sacrificial offering somewhere. But if I say, what is the quintessential slaughter ever through the history of the face of the earth? What would you think of?
Supreme sacrifice.
Which is the supreme sacrifice that ever happened on the whole face of the earth ever throughout all time? Yeshua. So if I say, look at Daniel 9:27 is talking about some pretty serious thing, and if it says slaughter, and that word is just sitting there by itself, you see in English, it has all these other little words filled in, giving understanding to the words that aren't there in Hebrew. In Hebrew, like I said before, it's like beads on a chain. Here's a bead, here's another bead, here's another bead. That's a 3-letter verb root. And in English, we jam them all together and we make a word, and they do the same thing with the sentences. In Hebrew, it's 7-1 partitioning the 7. And in English, they translated this 1 week halfway through the middle of the week, and so they call this 3.5 days or 3.5 years. Doesn't necessarily say that. It says 7-1 partitioning the 7. The word chatz, partition, literally means arrow, which also means to cut in half. If you take a single road with one line, you've cut the road in half. But if you take a wider road and put 6 lines down the middle, you've divided it into 7, like in Los Angeles Freeway. It just means partitioning. This thing is partitioning this room, but it's not necessarily down the middle. Hebrew concepts. I'm trying to show you how to think in a different way. The next word is, I think, is ha, mem, nun, chet. There might be a hey there too. This means to assign words or coin words, assign terms. So in other words, if we've got 22 letters that don't have a meaning other than, we know that Aleph is ox, Bet is house, Gimel is camel. Ox, house, camel, door. Do you see a story? You could make up a story, but do you see a particular message? But if we said, we're going to assign the terms which explain the partitioned 7, which is an echad voice, according to the vow of the covenant, and it will be that it is explained by the slaughter. What slaughter? The slaughter of the Messiah. Now I can say, the omnipotent eternal creator of the heavens and the earth put himself in some way that's of his imagination, but he put himself into the concrete form of matter of the universe, traveling to the earth, revealed as a man who would be slain, to show man the way to the, claiming to be the door, back to the Father's house. He was then put into a tomb, a round rock rolled in front of it, and sealed as a picture that we can enter the kingdom of heaven. And even if, like with the story of Israel, that it goes comatose in a chrysalis, it'll resurrect, come back later, resurrection of the dead, 3 days and 3 nights, he did resurrect. He then ascended up into heaven. The angel said he's going to come back the same way, and when he comes back, he'll be as the Resh, shining El Shaddai, teeth in fire to destroy his enemies and fulfill the covenant that he promised, just like he said. So here, breaking this into, this was the time he was in the tomb. This is him coming down here. This is Pilate chopping him up and throwing him into the tomb. And this is him coming back after he rose up. So the 22 are divided by the 7 of the vow. This is the 7th letter here, the crucifixion. This is the 7th letter here, the Ark of the Covenant, which is also the resurrection. So by dividing the 22 letters of the covenant, according to explaining the terms by the slaughter of Yeshua, it gives a whole different sense of meaning to other than ox, house, camel, door, which are just objects that go nowhere, but you could make up a little fairy tale if you wanted to. So this is now saying, I can choose to read these words as saying, if I assign the terms of the slaughter to the explanation of the 22 components which compose the clear, pure covenant, what is this word hagabir? Who's he that's doing this? If I look in the dictionary, the verb root, minus the yod here, is gabor, gimel bet resh, like the famous actress Zsa Zsa Gabor. Gabor, same word. Gabor layawa, Gabor were David's mighty men. It means champion, hero, wealthy, stardom. It's all that picture. If this is either a vav or a yod, it doesn't change the verb root, which is gabar. Hagabar. Well, the covenant that was given to Abraham, validated and spelled out in black and white, literally, or flame letters, to Moshe, which David himself said, man, that stuff is great. I'm so glad to be a part of this, that Yeshua came to reaffirm to us. What covenant is that? It's this covenant explained by the 22 letters. So if the pure, clean covenant, which is the greatest thing that the world has ever seen, Moshe said his last words, Deuteronomy 34, who is like you, Israel? There's no other people group on the face of the earth throughout all history who has ever had such an Elohim who would bend down and bless you and call you his own, and you're the favor, the twinkle of his eye, who's willing to forgive your willful sins, to cleanse you, to do everything he can to carry you and push your enemies back and have them work for you. There's no contract like this. There's no Elohim like this. There's no people group like this. Do you realize who you are? Do you realize the deal you've been handed? But your enemies will try to lie to you and deceive you. And then he said, goodbye. Just last words. The Gabir Brit, composed of the 22 parts, which is this, explained by the great slaughter. I'm trying to set that up. Now I'll show you, this is as far as we got last time, then I'll show you the other words. I have that here, this is written right here in front of me, here. Ve'al kanaf. This is on the wings of what they say is astounding abominations, right? Will somebody look up this word in your dictionary? Mem, kuf, vav, zadi, makutzim. This word kuf zadi, remember, kuf zadi is the same word as end, which is the same word as I said, Yod Kuf Zadi meant wake up. And then the word is Mem, Sheen, Mem, Mem. And then Ve'ad, remember this word Ayin Dalet is the word translated as when or until, but it's also the word for witness or testify. Or the word, if you add a yod, it's actually choice best. Where Yahweh says he adorned himself, that's that same word. Kaf lamed hey. Does anybody know this word kala? K-A-L-L-A-H is the way you'd pronounce it. Do you know what word that is? Kala? This is the word bride. This word is all. So the bride is the one who turns her back on her former life, all of it, and becomes her husband's. Then this is Nun, Chet, Resh, Zadi, Hey, Tav, Kaf, and the last word, Al-Shamam. Okay, so we just set up that because verse 924 was the Mishkan pattern that looked like the menorah shape, which was the heart of the alphabet, that 927, the whole beginning half of it, was invoking the same pattern as the covenant, the greatest covenant that anybody's ever seen, which is Yahweh's promise to restore his people, just like it's modeled after Yeshua. Though he was crucified, he came back to life and ascended as the Resh man instead of the whipped and beaten Vav man. The caterpillar type becomes the butterfly type, and I'm saying that according to the deeper you look into this, it's not only a picture of we as carnal humans walk the earth and die, like going into the Chet, but also we'll come back unto eternal life. It's also a model of Israel breaking the covenant and going into captivity, waking up after 2,730 years and coming back to his prestige, his favor, doing what he said. That's what is in this pattern. That's the Gabir Brit. I'm using the word Gabir as an adjective and not necessarily the noun of he will forge a strong covenant with many. That's what it says. But it doesn't say who. And I'm suggesting if we read the words differently, letter by letter, word for word, using the dictionary, there is no he. And there's no word forge a strong. But because the word Gabir means powerful, wealthy, superstar, they've imposed that word forge a strong. But it's just not there. These are the words. I'm showing you what they are. Okay, now, if you look at this, Ayin Lamed, if you look at that word, it's a yoke, which is a connection, which is connected to. Something is riding on or bearing with. It's also the word Ayin Lamed Hey, which means the upper part. And a lot of times you'll see this as simply meaning the word above. And this word kanaf is actually wing. Now, if we go back to the teeter-totter model, which is all about getting the kingdom back, getting the blessings back, here's the teeter-totter. If Israel is down, subjected to the other nations because they're up, if we do what he says, the teeter-totter changes, and now Israel's up, and the other nations are down. That's what Deuteronomy 34, the Song of Moses, is all about, and that's what the entire story is all about. How do we get the kingdom back? Do righteousness, do what he said. We start doing righteousness, the teeter-totter changes. The last talk we were just talking about, Ezekiel 36:23, is exactly the same thing. I will fulfill my great reputation, which is everything these words are about, when you guys make my Shem Kadosh, in the eyes, the understanding of the nations amongst whom you've been scattered. We come back to the reality of what he said, make it comprehensible, put on display to the people around us, and then Yahweh says, okay, now that you're telling the truth, I will step in and do my actions according to what you believed and said, because it's the truth, which goes back to the pattern of the 22 divided by 7, which is 1, echad, which is exactly what the first half of this verse said. So I'm going to translate this as meaning the teeter-totter shifting and giving us the upswing wing. Okay, who looked up this word makutz? What does that mean? Did somebody look it up? Somebody was supposed to look in the dictionary. Did you? What does it say? You could look at the word with a mem, or you could look at the word simply kutz. But how is that word translated? You got it? Cut, chop. Anything else? See, if it means end, if you have a carrot and you chop it up until you've chopped up the whole carrot, that's the end of that carrot. Israel is being chopped up because they were depressed and ground under the feet of their enemies because they forsook the covenant. One way to find this is to go back and chop up these words, letter by letter, and find out what he said. So there's different ways you can read this thing. Mem means the place of, or it means away from, which means you're not there anymore. It also means to function as a tool, where it turns an abstract noun into a concrete concept. So knowing something, that's knowledge, but knowledge, that's an abstract noun. That's what the prefix letter mem does. So you take this concept of we got chopped up, but the upswing wing says, hey, wake up. You might say use as a tool the cutting up of the words so that you can see what's really going on. And then there's this word ma shamamam. Here's the mem again, which is just like that one. And this word shamam, literally astounding, abomination, desolate, ruins. This is insane. This is crazy, demented. That word means all that stuff. It's like, how could our forefathers have done this? Were they nuts? Were they stoned? Were they idiots? Didn't they know what they had? This is absolutely crazy, once you see what's really going on, that anyone would turn their back on such a Gabir Brit. Go back and read what Moses said. Do you guys realize what you had? And this is why Joshua and Caleb, two of those 12 spies, they went into the land. They see the giants, they see the walled cities, they come back with a whole thing of a cluster of grapes, and they go, man, this land, there's nothing like it on the face of the earth. This is ours. Yahweh's handing it to us. What a deal. And 10 spies started crying, and they said, oh, we can't do this. We're done for. We might as well just lay down and die right here. Let's go back to Egypt and have the whip on our back and be slaves, because this is too difficult. And Joshua and Caleb couldn't believe their ears. They started crying out and going, what are you guys saying? Shut up. Oh, man. And then the people wanted to stone them. Joshua and Caleb couldn't understand. They couldn't believe what the people were doing. You're throwing this away. What the... And then finally, Yahweh said, okay, that's it. I've heard enough. 40 years in the desert. Back you go. You're not going in. Oh, gosh. That's the astounding shamam of like, what the heck? Us being lifted up out of being chopped up and away from the astounding. Now, this is the time of when. It's the witness and testifying of when the bride... Who looked up this word? Nun, het, resh, zadi. But the nun is a prefix, so you could just look up het, resh, zadi, and hey is the expression. Meaning, the word zadik is righteous, zadikah is righteousness, the way righteous looks. So the hey, which is the feminine suffix, is something on display where you can see what it actually looks like because it's functioning. And the nun means also, like this lightning bolt, putting it into action. So what is the word het, resh, zadi? Does somebody have that one? Red dictionary? Come on, there's a few red dictionaries floating around. Het, resh, zadi, or somebody could look up nun, het, resh, zadi. I'm just giving you a little exercise for your new books that some people have got. You got it? Okay, look it up, and I'll tell you what it means. It means resolute, decidedly, determinedly, emphatically. I got to do this. There's no going back. I've had enough. I'm sick to death with the other stuff. This ain't going to happen again, not on my watch. We're going for this. That's the attitude described by this word, which is the attitude of the bride, which is the time when things change. Do you have that word? Okay, well, we'll carry on. This word, tav, you'll see as a prefix means where you stand, under your feet. That's the word sub, hypo, and under. What do you got? Cut, incision. Incision, verdict. Okay, if you put other prefixes around it, you'll find, if you look at the other suffixes, you'll see what I'm saying. A verdict is a decision that says, picture a court case. It's going on, and finally the judge says, okay, that's it, clank, Just like Yahweh said, okay, I've heard enough. Bam, you guys in the wilderness for 40 years. That kind of action is what this word is. Until the bride makes that kind of a decision in the middle of all the nonsense, this word is you as a suffix, or your. Tav kaf is, I believe, also the word for to cut something into, where the word for stitch or seam, I believe that's the word. But tav is, like I said, sub-hypo under, and it's kind of like from within, from everything you're about. The bride decides to be what? This word ayin lamed shamamam, which is astounding desolation. Well, if the word ayin lamed means yoked to, but if it means rise above, or if it, but you'll see that ayin lamed is a prefix which means together with, concerning, because of, in spite of the horrors, the terrors, the scary stuff. It doesn't matter how big the giants are. It doesn't matter how high their walled cities are. If the bride right in the middle of the whole thing says, hey, I'm going to resolve to say, this is when. We're going to do this until you say when. When I choose the choice best of Yahweh's witness and testimony, which is everything he said right here in his Moedim, and I'm going to lift up out of this place, because that's the terms of the covenant that he established at the beginning with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, bought into it, Esau and Ishmael, and the whole other side of everybody in the rest of the world who has nothing to do with it. They don't care. They don't want to know. It's not their covenant. It's not their deal. It's not their religion. It's not what their church preaches. It's not what their culture and tradition is. Doesn't matter. What I'm saying is we can look back here at 927 and say, the fact we're sitting here at this festival on this day that he said, do not do any work, on the seventh day of the festival of Chag HaMatzot, and the word matzot is not just the flatbread that you eat, but it means find out how to do something. Find out how to do what? What's this whole deal all about? Getting the kingdom back, coming back to the terms of the great covenant, where Yahweh's favor turns to us, and his anger and wrath turns on the very people that he allowed to come in and ruin us for 3,000 years. That's what this is about. And it, again, the ball's in our court to simply turn back to his ways. Okay, what are these mysterious ways that everybody's been running from so far and for so many years? It goes back to the pattern. Keep the Sabbath day. It's in the Ten Commandments. Know who he is. That's like the big white fence with the four-colored door, which is Yod He Vav He, his name in colors, blue, purple, red, white. His identity, the first of the Ten Commandments. Don't have any other Elohim. Okay, turn your back on the rebellion, and like we just read in Ezekiel 36, you guys and your idolatry is the cause of it all. Idolatry, where do we got any idolatry? The wrong name, the wrong day, the wrong festivals, perhaps the wrong calendar, on and on. Get rid of the idolatry, stop that stuff, and come back to his identity. And he says, and if you take up my name and you consider it nothing, you trivialize it or you pollute it, that's taking it in vain. Don't do that. And then he says, my day. Well, his day talks about his name. He says, I am the guy who made the heavens and the earth, therefore I possess them. So, to stop on the seventh day and not work points the finger at his identity. So that's going back to making his name halal, desecrating. We'll just do it on the seventh day. You know, all the days are just fine. We'll just do it on the first day. We'll just do it on the fifth day, the third day. You know, it doesn't matter. I've heard people say it doesn't matter. He said it mattered because it testified to the fact that he's the guy that made the world in 6 days, the rest of the seventh. It's his name, and it's his character and disposition, which is Shem. And then he says, honor your parents and treat each other with that's as hard as it gets. Know him, do things his way, because it testifies of him, and quit ripping each other off. That's Zadikah. And the word Zadikah, which is righteousness, which is all those 10 things, is also the word that means victory, deliverance, and salvation. And how do we get delivered? The teeter-totter shifts, and he pulls us up away from appalling desolation, ruin, distortion, perversion, and the bad guys ruling over us with a whip and with their boot on the back of our head, grinding it into the rocks. He lifts us up out of that, just like a teeter-totter. You shift the weight, and boom, it's a shifting of the scales. There's another verse, I could look it up, tell you where it is, but he said, it's not about the sacrifices, the slaughterings. He said, it's not about your singing, it's not about your worship meetings with all your beautiful songs, it's not about bringing me slaughtering offerings and your festivals. He said, rather, let mishpat be like water. Another translation says flow like water. What's mishpat? Balancing of scales. Water finds its own level. What you do with each other, remember, when you do evil, evil comes in to balance it up. When you do righteousness, righteousness comes in to even it up. And the same word righteousness is victory, deliverance, and salvation. He said it is like mishpat. His throne is established on mishpat, balanced scales. When you get it about mishpat, so that you do righteousness, he then says, and righteousness flowing like a river, just like when you push something down, everything flows to make it level. So you look at the words, you translate the words, you get the picture, and you realize that what he's saying is the way you translate everything in Hebrew. It's this picture concept where he's describing that the kingdom functions like what we call physics. Everything is fit up with flow and mechanical apparatus of cause and effect. And he says, I put it in your hands to do it, and in your mouth to speak it. And Yeshua came down to buy us back. We were in so deep we couldn't get our heads up enough to even comprehend. So Yeshua came to buy us back to level and show us the way to do it, and gave us the words. And it's been distorted ever since. So when the bride chooses to come back and be the witness by, that's it, decisively, I will do so, he lifts us up from under our feet. We don't even have to climb up out of the hole. He lifts us up from underneath, like the teeter-totter shifting. And everything changes in an instant. In an instant, like the sprout of the Zadi. That's the picture in the story. Overnight, Aaron's rod twigged out, leaf, blossom, fruit. Astounding. It doesn't happen that way. In nature, he will defy what looks like the order of nature of cause and effect, because he's fulfilling his order, which supersedes the natural cause and effect with you might say, a spiritual dynamic of cause and effect, which he says you guys don't understand. But it's right here in these words. But this verse, which explains this whole thing, is the most terrifying verse, if you read it the way they've given it, which says, okay, we don't have a prayer. We don't have even a voice of request, because Yahweh's already decreed that we're going to be stomped on, ruined, spit out by the stunning abominations until the end of the 7-year tribulation. I don't see any of that in these words. So now we can choose to believe the reality that we would like to experience. Yahweh said when they were in the wilderness, quit saying that I'm going to take you out here and kill you. I took you out here to give you that promised land. And they kept saying, no. Was there not enough graves in Egypt that you took us out here to kill us and bury us here? He said, don't keep saying those words, or that's what's going to happen. They kept saying it. He says, okay, you're going to die in the wilderness and I'll bury you here. And then your children can go in. You guys lost it. What we say, what we choose to believe, will manifest it. And I'm not saying dream up some pipe dream where you can imagine that you win the lottery and you get to live on the top of Mount Olympus and all the world thinks that you're beautiful and wonderful. It's like, whatever. But these are his words. This we can imagine. This we can choose to believe. And he says, according to your faith, so be it unto you. Then if we're going to imagine something, why don't we imagine his words are true, line up with it, and go, You betcha, right down there, Yashar Derek, that straight path, no wavering, no turning, not right, not left, what he said, and oh, but it's too hard. They told us it was too hard. Our enemies deceived us by saying, you can't keep the covenant. You were never meant to keep the covenant. It's too hard to keep the covenant. The only reason he gave you the covenant was to show you it's the law that you can't keep so that you'd believe in the Savior who said, now that you believe in him, you don't have to do any of those things. Every one of those things, I believe, is a dadgum lie, the deception of the enemy to keep his people away from these words and this understanding. Keeping the covenant is his name, his day, his festivals, and quit ripping each other off while you honor your mother and father. That's about it. Hallelujah. Okay, open up to you. This is the last meeting, and I don't know how much time we have, but does anybody else want to say anything? You want to come up? You want to take the mic? 35 minutes. Okay, this is opened up to you guys. What do you got? Yes. Is 3.14, which is pi. People who study math and people who study the significance of numbers and ley lines of energy and stuff know that whenever you see 3.14 somewhere embedded in nature, it's not by accident. And if somebody built that into architecture, it was on purpose. And so to find 3.14 in this is like, okay, something's going on here. It's like this red flag waving at you to take note and pay attention. So 22 divided by 7, like going back to the beginning of that, 7, 1, and partitioning the 7 with many. How many? The 22. Somebody else had their hand up. Ben. He said,
you're up there, oh, I want to go to the top of the mountain, I want to be, no. What do you want me to look like to represent you, to walk in front of the nations? With your head down, humble, in his will, walking in his will, and then everything will flow through.
That's Micah 6:8. He said, he's shown you, O man, what is good, and Yahweh requires of you, or Elohim requires of you. Do justly, that's the menorah, that lines up with this triangle down here in this pattern. Do justly, be his branches bearing the light. Love mercy, that lines up with the iron, which is watch out for your fellow. And walk humbly, which is that word you're describing, which, just as we mentioned before, the Tony Robbins model of, I'm a success, I'm dynamic, I'm it. It's like, well, your humble is quite the counter opposite of that. The tabernacle is a circle.
Yeah, he believes it was round, and it's the exact formula of pi.
So you look up on the 314 project, project 314, like pi 3.14.
That fits into my formula of the round.
The cranial. Okay, go ahead.
When I was coming up here on Saturday, just before I was leaving Edmonton, I saw a taxi pass me. Didn't think nothing of it. I saw this big sticker on the back of his taxi that said pi. Was a symbol, pi. So I knew I was heading in the right direction.
First slice is right across the middle. Anybody else want to say anything? This is, the last half hour or so we've got of this. Any questions?
Yeah, I have a question for you. So with this, because you had mentioned earlier that you had taken all the languages or the ancient stuff and you kind of created this. So is it pretty close to what you saw? Like, was there, I guess the question I'm asking, all the older ancient stuff that you studied, was there a lot of similarities in each letter? Or?
If you go to the website called Ancient Hebrew, you'll see this font right here that Tim has on his chart. Those are actual letters found on actual documents of artifacts. I personally don't like those letter shapes because they're disturbing to my mind. These letter shapes, I didn't invent these shapes. These are actual artifact letter shapes from various different documents scattered over 1,000 years or so. And to me, they're simple, they're easy to write, they're easy to distinguish, and they're easy on the mind. But they're not sacred, meaning I don't know who came up with those shapes, but there's this concept. For example, there's this, I was reading something a long time ago, and it said, the notion of the perfect chair. What are its features? The perfect chair. If you could build it. This is a mighty fine chair, but is it the perfect one? Or could you think of a better design? How about that chair? This is kind of cumbersome. That's pretty utility. And then you have a rocking chair, or then you have a high chair, and then you could come up with 10,000 different designs of chairs. But what does the ultimate chair look like? We can't even imagine. So every picture or every model of a chair we build is, in some sense, our attempt to get to the perfect chair. Okay, so this study I was studying says that's kind of the same thing about these letters, the orthography of the letters. There's the perfect shape of the letter which captures and epitomizes everything that letter means, and we have a pretty hard time finding what it is because Yahweh wrote that with his finger on the tables of stone, but no one has ever seen it. And we don't even know what Moshe wrote, and Moshe would have had the 10 stones right in, or the 10 words on the stone right in front of him. So everything else is kind of a guess, but these are very ancient, and so the letter styles that I picked were the ones that I personally thought clearest, easiest, and which epitomized or which captured what I thought was the heart of the concept.
So when you said that there was a Torah scroll that was found in Qumran, is that text similar to some of the...
That was way modern.
Oh, I thought you said
There was a Leviticus scroll found. Yeah, and that was Paleo letters, and these are some of the shapes, but you'll see some of the letter shapes are different than this, and I put them there so that people could ponder it and say, well, what's the similarity, what's the difference? And then you don't know who the scribe was. If you find an artifact of a petroglyph, something carved in stone, was it some kids messing around? Was it a schooled scholar, or was it somebody practicing, or, was it graffiti? Ancient, yeah. Okay, I believe that Mark Gravel in Langley, Vancouver, BC, had printed up 1,000 of these a few years ago. I don't know how many he has left or if he even still has them because he had to move. I sent him an email the other day, and I haven't got a chance to even look to see whether it got back or whether the email went through. I will call him. I just haven't had a chance to call. I've got his phone number with me, but I just haven't had a chance to do it. If we send charts over the border, they automatically charge like $40, $50. If you buy them, get them from Mark Gravel, and he has a whole stack of them, the reason why he printed them up was for the ease of shipping through Canada. So he's at Bondservants of Elohim, I believe it's .org. So anyway, if you cannot get them from Mark Gravel, I still have 100 charts at home. We had printed up 1,000 back in 2010, we've got 100 left. In which case I'd be happy to send them up. But I'm just saying, if you can get them from Mark, that might be, you can have the PDF file online. I've got it on the thumb drive. You can get it off my site. But this probably costs a minimum of $50 because print shops charge by the square foot, and then if you get it laminated, it's more. I've got one other thing I brought here, just a second.
smaller than that, and it'll be cheaper.
I printed it up about 24, 25 inches across the top so that you could put it on the back of a door. You know, most people's walls already have designs and pictures and whatever, but if you put it on the back of a closet door, sometimes, unless you have something hanging there, you know, it'll fit between the hinge and the door handle. That's why I made it that size, and it just is the length it is, but it could have been bigger, but I tried to keep it as reduced as possible. What I've tried to do, and which is on the Shields Project thing that I had written up and emailed to people, if you can have it if you want it, it's 180 pages, but there's a bunch of graphics that I've done and turned them into stickers, so I've handed them out different places I go. I brought these with me, which you're welcome to have. There's not too many of each. I just grabbed a handful. I was running out the door. This says, Ak Sameach. That's the same word as Simcha, which is rejoice. So this is only rejoice, which is the command for the Sukkot festival. You will only rejoice at your festival. Ak Sameach. And so if you want to dissect this, Aleph is this like this arrowhead, and the Kaf is the suffix letter meaning you or your. So this is kind of like your instruction, or this is the plan to give you. Rejoicing is that you rejoice. I don't feel like rejoicing. Start rejoicing, and somehow it makes life happen. That's a catalyst. The other one says, Rak Hazak Ve'emetz. This is what, it's repeated numerous times, but this is what he said to Joshua, just as Joshua was about to go in the land, right there in the beginning of the book. This also means only, similar to Ak, but it means thin, minute, which is to say, there's just a little thing, just one little thing you got to do. Chazak is be strong and courageous, and Ametz is, well, that's be strong and very courageous. So in other words, our attitude, the fortitude of our mind, is our part of the equation. He's not calling us to lift a bunch of weights and be tough guys or develop the best weaponry. Our part of the job is to trust him, realize that the covenant is true, valid, and lasting. Our enemies are going to go through seminary, put people in the pulpit, preach at us that not only is it not true, but they're going to tell us that we would be betraying the blood of our dear Savior if we went back to these words. It's a deception, not true. Trust the words of Yahweh and be strong and very courageous. This word Aleph Mem, this is the word Ametz, which is courageous. I'll just show you another way to read the words, right? Aleph Mem is the word mother, but it's also metropolis and nation. What's the correlation between those three definitions? A mother receives the seed, nurtures it, and puts out a baby. A factory brings in resources, manufacture it, and puts out the product. A nation does the same thing. It trades at the stock market and brings in commodities and has its people put this all together and puts out whatever, whether it's weapons or food or entertainment or whatever else that a nation exports. So that's what we're supposed to do, and Zadi is the sprout of coming back. But matz is that word like matzah, find out how to do something. Find out how to do what? What do you bring in to put out the product of courage? The words of the covenant, Zadi, the promise of the restored life of his favor and his people coming back to their preeminent status in the world as his Cohen. And again, as we said, Cohen, which is spelled Kaf, Hey, Nun. Hey, Nun is like Hey, Nun, Hey anyway. That's a feminine suffix of expression, means behold, hear, gladly. And then the word Kaf, Hey is yes, so, truly, thus, verily, verily. And then to take the first word and the last letter is the word Kaf Nun, where we get the duplicate the Nun, make it Kaf Nun. Nun is where we get the word canon, which means to aim, to calculate, where you tune in on a radio receiver and just right frequency, just right this and that, everything. It's the word for like an easel or a board like this or a tripod. It's put everything right there where, hey, behold, gladly, this is the truth. That's what the word Cohen means. So for us to look at this stuff and make this understandable in the eyes of the Gentiles amongst whom we've been scattered, and the word Gentile is goy, which is, we went through this before, I'll say it again, Gimel Vav Yod. This is G-O-I, goy, or Y. But the root of it, this means my, so that's a suffix. Vav means here, it, so that's a suffix, so we're left with the letter Gimel. And to find that, you put the prefix hey and the suffix hey, and you realize the word is Hagah, which literally means phonetic, meditate, think, ponder, and it also means to navigate. Rudder, helm, steering wheel. To navigate by pondering the spelling of words is Hagah. And the goy are the ones who can't think straight because they got bad words and letters. From Babel instead of from Yahuwah's Ruach HaKodesh. So I can take all the spelling of these words, look at what they mean, dissect, chop them up into little pieces, and go back to the place of the upswing teeter-totter, the upswept wing, the wing of his Ruach lifts us up. And the other interesting, to go back to that, another way to read some words, he claims to be numerous times the Elohim of Abraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov. And we think, oh, that's translated, I'm the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, which it says. But Avar, as in Avraham, literally is the pinion wing of an eagle, that which catches the wind, catches the drift, and soars to the great heights. Yitzhak is hilarious laughter into sport and play and go, wow. So as he lifts Abraham up with Isaac as like this firework going off, woohoo! And Yaakov literally means he will jump over into the third dimension. The word Kob is where they have the Kaaba stone in Mecca. It's where we get the word cube, which is the z-axis, or put into the third dimension, which is to jump up over an obstacle like Superman. So to be the Elohim of Abraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov literally means I am the power that gives you that updraft, like the upswept wing, al-kanaf, which gives you the soaring heights like a spectacular fireworks display over your adversaries that are otherwise earthbound on the two-dimensional plane. Another way to read the Elohim of... And he has promised that to us. That's the Gabir Brit, validated by the 22 divided by 7, which is 1. See how it all fits? It's like a puzzle. So anyway, you guys are welcome to have these, and if we need more, I can get more printed and send them up. This was a, did you guys ever see this? It's a big banner thing that I made. It's Sukkot up here in BC a couple years ago. And the PowerPoint's available. I only have this one. I grabbed things and ran. I was running late for the airport. In talking to a friend, Doug and Jacinth over here in Sundre, we were contemplating, why are we doing this stuff? Why do we have Sukkot? The word kra, kufresh aleph, means to call, to invite, to summon, to learn how to read Scripture. And what we were going to do at Sukkot was do that, call people in to learn how to read Scripture. So this says, it's about the language, how to hear what the words speak in his own voice. Yahuwah, as per Devarim chapter 4, you can go back and read that. 2 pillars like the Torah scroll of fire and smoke. And this says, Shema et kol shafah hakodesh vayikra midbar Yahweh. Shema, hear, believe, and put into practice. Aleph Tav kol, the Aleph Tav voice. Shafah is the language which restores you to health and cures from lunacy, pure and smooth and clean. HaKadosh, the Kodesh language, Vayikra, and learn how to read. Midbar, you could say, well, Midbar, that's wilderness, but Mem, again, means the place of the bar, which is words. The place of the agreement, the place of what he told us, which is the language of the Shafah Kodesh. Vayikra is one of those jots and tittles with a small aleph. So if you say, well, what does this mean? Just speculating. If you look at it without the aleph, the word is ikur, which means to become precious, dear, and valuable as if something very rare. Like finding, you had an old piece of metal and you say, I don't know what this is. You take it into a metalsmith and he cleans it up and says, oh, this is the most valuable coin you've ever found and it's worth $1 jillion. And you go, wow, that attitude of like, wow, is what we do about this because we learn how to read his words. That's what the word ikur means. And then this over here on the side says, Kadoshim tayo ki kadosh ani. You will be kadosh because I am kadosh. Well, that's a command. You better eat the food I told you to eat, which is what he's talking about in Leviticus 19:2. But he says, look it, this is the formula for how you become kadosh. Because I am kadosh, and this is my stuff. You walk in my stuff, and you become like me. That's why Yeshua said, I only say what I hear my Father saying, so you say what you hear the Father saying, which is Hebrew, not English or Greek, then you become kadosh. You walk in his ways. Yeshua said, I only do what I see my Father doing, so we do what he's doing. This is his dance. His dance is these 7 steps, like the circle dance. Over here it says hula rocked. Hula is to do a dance in the sand, which tells a story, which is the festivals, this circle dance. And rakid is the word for to dance. That resh kuf, rak is to be thin, small, and just this little thing. Forget what kuf dalet yod means, or kif yod dalet. Anyway, but my point is, this is Yahweh's dance. This is the dance steps. All we have to do is walk around the year doing these dance steps, like he said, and we become kadosh. This other word says alfun ivrit nesni. Alfun is the root of the word aleph, where you get the word for Alps, which is the highest and the best. The Alfun in Israel is the school for the intensive study of the Hebrew language. Ivrit, Hebrew, which means to cross over or become something different than you used to be. And the Nesanai, which as was imported on Mount Sinai, the word Sinai literally in the dictionary means erudite study or scholarship. Why did he name it Mount Sinai? Because these are the words we're supposed to study with intensive scholarship. If you read the translation of the words, that's not very intensive study. I mean, it's accurate, but okay, that's the dictionary. Where do you go from there? It's in chopping up the words and letters and seeing the depth, and then it just, like I mentioned before, it's hyperdimensional. It just goes like crazy, and the amount of study you can do. But as you study, the word nun samik, or nun samik here, literally means to be lifted up. He says, I have raised up a banner because of the truth. The word raise up a banner is nun samik, which is nas, because of the truth. My wife had made this nun samik banner, which is on the business card, this orange thing here, which is a picture of that. He said, the word my banner over you is love. This is the banner. It's the word nun samik, or nun samik. So you could put all these things together like a jigsaw puzzle. If anybody wants one of the cards, you're welcome to here. To put all this together like a crossword puzzle, a jigsaw puzzle, is to do the erudite scholarship, which makes us his kodashim when we shema his kol, his voice, and put it into practice. I'm trying to show you the words weaving back on top of each other like this big ornate knot. And the word for spinning is gadil, similar to gadol, which is similar to gabor, but it's just this twisted wreathed work which brings something to elegance. And the festoons that you put on top of a pillar. That's what we're doing by looking at the language. I'm just trying to give you an appreciation for what's in these words, to give you an enthusiasm from within yourself, not to memorize what I say, but for you to find it yourself, which is what Brenda was giving testimony of the other day. She started looking at these words, and what stirred up within her couldn't be put into words. Back on you. Anything else you want to say? Sorry, there's only one. I could send it more if you want, but anybody can have that if they want it. Yes. He has shown you, O man, what is good, tov, and what Elohim requires of you. 3 things. Do justly, love mercy, walk humbly with your Elohim. So you could say, well, hey, I thought there was a Mishkan pattern of 7 and a Brit of 22. What does that do? Okay, back to the Mishkan pattern. You're in the darkness. Choose life, learn the instructions, take it to heart, and then do justly, love mercy, walk humbly with your Elohim, and the hope set before you is the resurrection, the restoration unto eternity. So that's why these 3 things are in this triangle, because that's where the life is lived. We choose life. Moshe said, I put before you life and death. Choose life. We step into his realm of Torah to learn the protocols of the kingdom, the instructions, do this, don't do that. We wipe away the iniquity, going back to the model in Daniel 9:24 of the laver. They were made out of the mirrors of the women, introspection of yourself. What do I look like? What am I doing? Why did I say that? What should I have said? Blah, blah. Washing, cleansing, bathing, mikvah. And then, having dealt with that, you chose life, learn the instructions, take it to heart, do what he said. That's do justly. It's a picture of the menorah. I'm the vine, you're the branches, stay plugged into me and just bear fruit. That's doing justly. That's mishpat. Love mercy. Mercy is the lining up with the ayin with the table of showbread, which is like the Beatitude. Blessed are the merciful, for they will receive mercy. With the measure you use, it will be measured to you. When you're bearing the fruit, because the ayin is drawn like a fruit with a stem and the seed in it that's also an eyeball, the fruit is born on the menorah, which is the vine and branches. So as you're doing justly, you're bearing fruit. And then the pay is the mouth, which eats the fruit. So the three work together. Bear fruit, do justly. As you're bearing fruit, you'll eat the fruit. And then, like birds that they recycle the seeds when they eat the fruit. It's all this cycle. So it's what's going on within this triangle, which is where we live the life of being his people. His Kodeshim Elyonin. Talks about in Daniel 8. So we didn't get to Daniel 8 or much of Daniel 7, which we could talk about later if you want, but we're out of time. We've got a couple more minutes if anybody wants to talk. This is the last of the things, so if you want to say anything to each other, does anybody else want to come up and just talk to each other? Not about my stuff, but of anything else even? It's wide open if you want. What is it, Deuteronomy 30:14?
Here's that scene from Lev to Levov. What causes the change? Understanding.
Taking it to heart.
Words changes the Lev to Levov.
Yeah, so as we consume his words, as we ponder his words, as we fellowship in his words, it gets deep into our heart, and then it comes. Just so you know, the word lamed bet is heart. Lamed bet. That's our letter L, and the bet is pronounced as either a B or a V, which is where we get the word love. That's with the O and the E, love, L-O-V-E, but also where we get the word lava. If you put a hey at it, is the expression of love, literally the word lava, like molten lava, L-A-V-A, and it means to be inflamed with passion, the expression of love. But the Hebrew word for love is actually aleph, hey, bet, hey. Aleph means like I will, and hey, bet means give. Give. So the word love in Hebrew isn't love, that's the word heart, but the word love in Hebrew is I will give and then expressed, like put on display, like the wind, like opening up the window. So what you give is really your love as it's manifest. Not necessarily just what you say, but that's a vehicle of a conduct of frequencies and that whole business. Anybody else? Okay, this will never happen again, just so you know, but we're going to quit a couple minutes early.